society, people need to work together, and the only way they can work together is with language, and so on. So you're saying ideas don't matter, the ideas people have don't affect their culture. And he's saying, well, ideas can matter because feminism is a good example. Even when women going into the workforce pushed wages down and had the effect of destroying unions, which tended to make it much harder to make a living for people in the industrial economy, and therefore forced even more women to go into the workforce and so on. Even as this process made people's lives worse, right? The introduction of women into the workforce, the idea was so strong that it continued the process, okay? That it continued to require women to think about working as an important method of respect, okay? Even though ultimately feminism really only has to do with that. This is a particular account, right? And what you'll notice about this count is there's no room in it for something like respect. Why? Because for him, respect is not a category of basic human well-being. Okay? Again, the list is there. And if you want to deal with Harris, I suggest you take a look at that list, right? It doesn't, sex, hunger, thirst, sleep, language acquisition, etc. Respect's not on there. What do you guys think of this list in this slide? Do you think that this is right? Does culture, Kyle, please. Does culture have something to do with just basic human needs? Casey, what do you think? Is culture driven by the requirement to satisfy basic human needs, or is there anything else that makes culture happen? You don't know? Yeah.
I think it's something more because if every culture has this, then they would all be the same. What makes every culture different?
That's a great point. That's a great point. If all cultures are just basically surviving, creating the same list, then why are cultures different? I think Harris might argue that deep down all cultures are the same. We're all just basically concerned with the kinds of rituals and beliefs and ideals that will help us to, as a group, to satisfy our needs. And then everything else is just details. But I tend to agree with you that if Harris's case, that Harris's model is not predictive, for example, because it doesn't seem, all it seems to predict is that cultures will have these, that people have these needs, not that cultures will be certain needs. Yeah, Mary.
In a way, I agree with him that at least the foundation of every culture, you'll find ways that people figure out how to satisfy these needs based on, their environment. So in that way, culture can be scientific, but I feel like culture is so much more than that.
Okay.
There's a lot that is developed out of it.
So the culture is part of this. This is part of culture. So do you think because of that there are cultures that have survived that don't foster these human needs?
I think that no. I think that cultures have to
They have.
satisfy these needs.
Okay.
And then once these needs are satisfied, then they can develop into more complex.
Interesting. That's a really interesting thesis, okay, that Harris doesn't deal with much, which is that culture does have to have basic human needs, and then beyond that there's other things. Let me ask you, do you think affective nurturance, which Matt summarized as upbringing, we also might call, affect means kind of emotional, so the emotional aspects of upbringing, are the emotional aspects of upbringing part of basic human needs, or are they part of that extra stuff you're talking about?
I think on some level, they're part of basic human needs, that there's that basic need to feel accepted and cared for.
And without that, the culture won't survive. Okay. Why? Because people will get sick and die without that?
Because then you don't really have a culture, you just have a group of people.
Okay.
If there's no connection and if there's no effort towards a continuation of that culture, then all you have is people hanging out.
All right, so there's a good argument for why that should be included in basic human needs. Matt? Jeff?
I think that the superstructure is just as important as the structure.
Oh, okay, why?
Because let's say, how we invented the marriage, right?
The which?
People like marriage.
Yeah.
Marriage is a part of culture.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, marriage leads to reproduction.
Yeah.
Which is a structure. So I think it's just like more complex way of like expressing a simple structure.
And marriage has a lot to do with religion and morality. Every time people get married, they're always talking about religion and morality. Right? So yeah, I agree. So superstructure and superstructure is just as important as structure.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's again another good argument to take to Harris, right? Harris tends to say that only these things are the most important, right? So let's look at that. Again, and you guys have looked at another important point. Just to wrap up on Harris, how do we do time? To wrap up on Harris, look at these last 2 points. Harris argues that cultures evolve over time to fit human needs and goals. Do you agree with this idea? In other words, do cultures get better over time so that cultures which do not fit human needs and goals must either change or perish? Right? So this is the basic question. Do you agree that cultures basically need to fit human needs and goals? And if you agree with Harris, do you agree with his list or do you have your own? That's the last question, basically. Do you agree with this list or should the list be changed? Right? And Meredith offered a good argument for why one of the things should be on the list. And I think basically that Jeff offered a good argument for why something like morality and religion should be included and added to the list. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Because we do want to get to Geertz otherwise. Or most of you don't want to get to Geertz, but you probably should. So you're required to. Okay, what do you got? Any reactions to the Geertz reading in general? People, was it easier or harder or less? What's the difference? What's the deal with winks and twitches? Anybody? Winks and twitches? What's the difference between a wink and a twitch? Aaron?
A wink communicates an idea, while a twitch is just a twitch. They're winking.
Okay, and what's the same about them?
How they look.
They look exactly the same, but a wink communicates an idea, right? So if my nerves do what they do and my right eye closes and opens, that might be a twitch, right? If it's not intentional, if it just happens, it's because I did it by accident, right? If it happens on purpose, then it's a wink, okay? So what Geertz gets at is basically what he's saying is culture is the difference between a wink and a twitch, right? Once you can understand that a wink and a twitch mean different things. Oh, and by the way, there isn't just a wink, there's like a sarcastic wink, where you might wink at a friend like saying, ha ha, I'm winking at you, I'm making fun of someone else for winking. Winking is sort of a corny thing to do, right? Or a practice wink. Maybe I would stand in my mirror at home and practice winking to people so that I would look really cool next time the occasion came up to wink. I haven't had a lot of experience with people winking at me. Maybe in Geertz's day, people winked a lot more. But right? But what Geertz is saying is what matters about this, right, ultimately, is that these things are subject to interpretation. So culture is ultimately a matter of interpretation. And of course, the interpretation of the person performing the wink or the twitch matters. But in terms of the interpretation of the other person, if I twitch and you think it's a wink, and you're like, why is the professor winking at me, right? Like, this could lead to some complications, right? So culture is a matter of interpretation. Culture as interpretation. Okay? The first way that Geertz manages to talk about this in anything like a sort of coherent, theoretical way is with the notion of a construction. He said that cultures are constructions. A wink is a construction. And by a construction, he means it has to be put together. The meaning of it has to be put together by the different people involved, right? So let me read to you from pages 16 and 17. And he's talking about ethnographic fieldwork and how ethnographic fieldwork is different than most other kinds of science that happen in labs and so on. So a little more than halfway down the page 16, in finished anthropological writings, this fact, that what we call our data are really our own constructions of other people's constructions of what they